The great hall of the Galactic Assembly was filled with light from 1,000 stars and the sound of quiet voices that carried the weight of judgment across the galaxy. The council had gathered to decide the fate of one small blue planet that had become a problem for them all. The planet was Earth, and the species in question was human. The representatives of many worlds stood in their places watching the tall figure of Commander Lucas Grant, who represented his home world. He stood straight, his uniform clean, but his face was cold and calm. The voice of the council speaker echoed across the chamber as she spoke of the dangers of human ambition and how the people of Earth had broken too many laws of balance and peace. She said that humans moved too fast, built too much, and reached too far into space, disturbing ancient powers and forgotten borders. The final words of her speech were simple. Earth is to be exiled. Humanity is no longer welcome among the stars. For a long moment, no one spoke and no one moved. Lucas Grant did not bow or argue. He simply stood still, his eyes fixed on the center of the hall. He knew this day would come. Humans had built their colonies faster than anyone expected. They had taken barren moons and dead planets and made them alive. They had created machines that learned and ships that could cross space faster than the old races liked. It was not hate that drove the council to this decision. It was fear. The fear that one day humans would not stop expanding until they stood above all others. When Grant returned to Earth, the world already knew. The broadcast of the council session had been sent to every city and colony. There were no riots and no shouts of anger. Instead, there was silence. The people of Earth had learned long ago that the galaxy never gave them a fair chance. They had been treated as newcomers, reckless and wild. The governments of Earth met in secret rooms across continents. The leaders were not surprised by the exile. They had seen it coming for years. President Linda Harper sat with her advisors in a small meeting room under Geneva. Her hands were folded, and her voice was calm as she spoke to the generals and scientists who sat before her. "We will not beg," she said, and no one in the room disagreed. Among those at the table was Dr. Ethan Brooks, who led the Terran Aerospace Initiative. He had spent his life building the ships that carried humans to new worlds. He spoke quietly, but his words carried weight. "If they do not want us among the stars, then we will find new ones of our own," he said. It was not a statement of anger. It was a statement of intent. The room grew silent as his idea took form. They would not wait to be told again. They would move forward faster than ever before. Operation Dawnbreak was born that day, though no one outside that room would hear its name for many years. Across the planet, work began in secret factories that once built ships for trade, now turned to new designs. Engineers drew plans for engines that could go beyond known space. Scientists worked day and night creating systems that could build whole colonies in weeks instead of decades. The people of Earth were no longer asking to join the galaxy. They were preparing to leave it entirely. On Mars, the first of the great orbital yards began to hum with life again. The red dust of its surface rose into the thin air as machines built the skeletons of new starships. On Earth, old cities came alive with new. Energy workers and builders worked side by side with machines in every corner of the planet. No one asked what would happen next. Everyone already knew. Lucas Grant became the face of quiet defiance. He traveled between the planets meeting with leaders and workers alike. He told them what he had seen and how the galaxy viewed them. They called humans dangerous, but that was because they could not understand what it meant to be human. Humans did not stop when told to stop. They did not break when pushed. They adapted and learned and moved forward. Every person who heard him speak felt the same fire grow inside them. They were not going to fade away because others were afraid of them. They were going to show the galaxy what it meant to survive years. Past and the Galactic Council watched with growing unease. They had expected Earth to fall into despair after the exile. Instead, they saw signs of progress they could not explain. Satellites that could not be traced. Ships that did not answer to any known registry energy readings from the edge of the solar system that grew stronger each month. The Council sent envoys to warn Earth to stop its expansion, but no reply ever came. The humans were silent, but their silence was louder than any threat. The message was clear. They were not waiting for permission. On Earth, President Harper looked out from her office at the night sky. The stars looked the same as they always had. But she knew that beyond them, things were changing. The first Dawnbreaker ships were almost complete. They would carry humans farther than any other species had ever dared to go. She thought of the old stories of explorers who crossed oceans without knowing what lay beyond. She smiled and whispered to herself, "We are still." Explorers Dr. Brooks stood in the heart of the Mars shipyard watching as the first frame of the flagship was lowered into place. The ship would be called Aurora Spear. It was the first of many, but it would not be the last. He looked around at the men and women who worked beside him, covered in dust and grease, and smiled at the thought of what they were building. They were not building weapons. They were building freedom. The engines of the Aurora Spear would not just take them to new worlds. They would take them beyond the reach of anyone who tried to stop them. Lucas Grant visited the shipyard before the first launch. The workers stopped to watch as he walked along the scaffolds. He spoke to them not as a commander, but as one. Of them, he told them that this was the beginning of a new chapter for humanity, not an end. They were no longer exiles. They were pioneers. The crowd cheered not in anger but in pride. They were ready to go, and nothing could stop them now. When the day of the first launch arrived, the sky over Mars glowed with the light of the engines. Thousands watched from the ground as the Aurora Spear rose slowly, then vanished into the dark. The people did not cry, and they did not cheer. They stood in silence, knowing that this moment would be remembered forever. Earth had been cast out from the galaxy, but its people had chosen their own path. They were not waiting to be told again. The age of exile had become the age of expansion, and the story of humanity was just beginning. The years after the first launch changed everything for humanity. The ships of the Dawnbreaker project began to leave one after another, each one carrying people who believed in the dream of finding a new place to call home. The people of Earth worked together as they had never done before. Nations that once argued over land and power now shared knowledge and resources. There were no more borders and no more talk of who owned the stars, because now everyone understood that the stars were free to all who had the courage to reach them. On Mars, Captain Marcus Lane took command of the Aurora Spear. After Lucas Grant stepped down to join the Council of Advisors, Lane was a calm and thoughtful man who believed that the future of humans depended not on how fast they could travel, but on how wisely they could use their new power. Beside him stood Lieutenant Ava Ramirez, a young pilot who had earned her place through skill and bravery. She was known for her sharp eyes and steady hands, and she trusted the captain completely. They both knew their mission was more than exploration. It was proof to the galaxy that humanity could rise without destruction. Back on Earth, Dr. Ethan Brooks continued to lead the scientists who were improving the quantum lattice engines that made the Dawnbreakers possible. These engines were unlike anything the galaxy had seen. They bent the fabric of space without tearing it, allowing ships to cross great distances safely. The Galactic Council called them unstable and dangerous, but the humans called them hope. President Linda Harper supported every effort to build more ships, and she sent messages to the colonies on Mars and Luna, reminding them that unity was their greatest strength. She spoke, often to the people, telling them that the exile was not punishment, but an opportunity to start again and prove their worth. The galaxy watched, but did not interfere. Most believed humans would vanish into the dark, as so many young races had done, before some worlds even celebrated the exile, believing the problem had solved itself. But deep in the quiet reaches of space, human ships were building something greater. Each Dawnbreaker that left the solar system carried not only colonists but also knowledge libraries of history and blueprints of machines that could build cities in days. They planted the seeds of new civilizations on every world they touched. They did not conquer. They created. Captain Lane and his crew of the Aurora Spear traveled farther than any human ship before them. They reached a star system with 3 golden worlds and 2 moons rich in minerals. They named the system Haven and began to build the first true colony beyond the map of the known galaxy. The people who landed there worked together with care and discipline. They built homes, greenhouses, and schools. They taught their children not to fear the stars, but to respect them. Every sunrise on Haven reminded them that they had made this with their own hands without asking anyone for permission. Lieutenant Ramirez often sat by the observation deck at night, watching the twin moons rise over the horizon. She thought of Earth and the cities she had left behind. Sometimes she wondered if the people back home would ever know what they had achieved here. Captain Lane would join her and remind her that their work was not for recognition. It was for survival and for the future generations who would grow up under new skies. The crew shared stories of home and dreams of what they would build next. They were no longer soldiers or explorers. They were settlers in the truest sense. On Mars, Dr. Brooks received the first transmission from Haven. It was short and simple. The message read, "We made." He smiled as he played it over and over again. The success of Haven proved that the Dawnbreaker program worked. He and his team began designing even larger ships, ones that could carry entire cities into the void. They called the new class Horizon. Ships, each one could hold thousands of people, and enough supplies to build a colony from nothing. It was a challenge, but humanity had never feared hard work. President Harper watched all this with pride and hope. She knew that Earth itself would, one day, send its last ship and join the rest of humanity beyond the old borders. She often walked through the launch sites speaking with workers and engineers. She told them stories about the first explorers who crossed oceans long ago. Her words reminded them that history was repeating itself only now. The oceans were made of stars. Her health began to fade, but she never stopped working. She wanted to see at least one Horizon ship leave before her time ended. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council began to hear strange reports. Traders traveling near the edge of human space claimed to see flashes of light that marked the use of new engines. They spoke of worlds that had gone dark and then shone again, as if life had returned. The Council grew uneasy. They sent messages demanding contact, but none were answered. They called another assembly to discuss the human question again. Some believed that humans had destroyed themselves. Others feared that they had grown beyond control. No one knew the truth, but every rumor made the Council more nervous. Back on Haven, life grew stronger. The colony had farms, water systems, and even art centers. People painted the skies and wrote songs about the journey that had brought them here. They still remembered Earth, but they no longer missed it. They were building a new story. Captain Lane and Lieutenant Ramirez often walked through the colony at night, listening to the laughter and music. They both knew that this peace would not last forever. The galaxy was too curious to leave them alone for long, but for now they had time to grow and prepare. Dr. Brooks visited Haven on a later mission to oversee the construction of a research base. He stood beside Captain Lane and looked at the twin suns rising over the colony. He told Lane that the next ships were almost ready and that soon humans would reach systems even farther away. Lane smiled and said that when that day came, the galaxy would finally understand what humans were capable of. Brooks nodded and said quietly, "They will not fear us forever. They will learn from us just as we learned from them." When the first Horizon ship finally left Mars, it carried 1,000,000 souls toward the unknown. The engines burned brighter than any before, and for a moment the night sky above Earth lit up with a glow that could be seen by anyone looking up from the ground. People stopped in the streets to watch as their future disappeared into the dark. They did not cry. They did not feel loss. They felt pride. Humanity had been cast out, but had turned exile into freedom. The Dawnbreaker and Horizon fleets were now the hope of a species that refused to bow to fear. They were writing their destiny, one star at a time, and they were not waiting for anyone to tell them when to begin. Time passed and the galaxy slowly forgot the people of Earth. The great powers turned their attention to trade, politics, and wars of their own making. Only a few old records reminded anyone that humans had once been part of the Galactic Council. In the dark parts of space far beyond the known borders, the Dawnbreaker and Horizon fleets continued to move forward. They had built dozens of colonies across new worlds, and many of these had grown into cities filled with life and color. The humans did not need the Council, and they did not miss the rules that had once kept them small. They were building something larger and stronger than anyone had imagined. Captain Marcus Lane had spent most of his life among the stars. He now led the Dawnbreaker fleet from the command deck of the Aurora Spear, which had become both a ship and a symbol of human pride. His hair had turned gray, but his eyes still held the same fire. He watched the screens that showed hundreds of human ships moving across the void. Each ship carried people, supplies, and dreams of the next step forward. Beside him stood Lieutenant Ava Ramirez, who had also aged but never lost her courage. She was now the second in command, and her voice carried respect wherever she spoke. Together they had turned a fleet of exiles into a network of new civilizations. On Haven, the first colony of the New Age life had changed beyond recognition. There were tall buildings shining under two suns. Children played in the parks where the air smelled of grass and iron. The people had learned to live with the rhythm of their twin moons. They had schools where young minds studied not only science and art, but also the story of their exile. They were taught that being cast out was not a curse but a beginning. Every year the colony celebrated Founders' Day, a festival that marked the moment humans had chosen to leave the galaxy and make their own destiny. Captain Lane and Ramirez often returned to Haven during this time to remind everyone that their strength came from unity and courage. Dr. Ethan Brooks was now known as the father of the new human expansion. He continued to lead research into faster and safer travel. His team had built engines that could move ships between galaxies. These new drives used energy drawn from the void itself, turning space into a living part of the journey. Brooks had lost many friends over the years, but he never stopped working. He believed that humanity was still only at the beginning of its story. He once told Lane that the day humans stopped reaching for new worlds would be the day they truly became lost. Lane agreed and promised that as long as he lived, the Dawnbreakers would never stop exploring. Back in the core worlds of the galaxy, rumors began to spread again. Traders and explorers reported seeing strange ships that moved without leaving energy trails. Some said they saw lights in the dark, moving faster than any known vessel. The Galactic Council tried to investigate, but every attempt ended in silence. The humans had vanished too far beyond reach. What worried the Council most was that these rumors were often followed by news of forgotten colonies coming back to life. Planets that had been dead for centuries were now showing signs of growth. When probes were sent, they found evidence of human technology but no people. It was as if humanity was planting seeds across the stars and letting them grow without guidance. On Haven, a new discovery changed everything. A small exploration team led by Ava Ramirez found an ancient structure buried under the northern desert. It was not human. It was older than any known civilization. The markings on its walls glowed faintly when touched, and the air around it seemed to hum with power. Brooks came to study it and quickly realized that it contained knowledge far beyond their understanding. The structure responded to human touch as if it had been waiting for them. He believed that this was proof that humanity's rise was not a mistake but part of something greater. Perhaps the galaxy had feared humans because deep down it knew that they were meant to continue what older races had started. The discovery was kept secret from most people. Only the leaders of the Dawnbreaker fleet and the colonies knew. The scientists began studying the ancient technology and learned how to use it to improve their ships. The new generation of engines based on the relic's design allowed them to travel not only across galaxies but also through layers of space that had never been explored before. They called it the slipstream, and it became the key to human expansion. The first ship to use it disappeared for months before returning with recordings of entire star clusters unknown to any map. The crew spoke of colors and sounds that no human words could describe, and they said that they had seen the light of worlds being born. The Galactic Council eventually learned that humanity was still alive and stronger. Then before they sent envoys again, hoping to establish contact and perhaps control what they could not understand. The messages were sent through every channel, but none were answered. Weeks later, the Council received a transmission. It was short, clear, and carried the voice of Captain Lane. He said that humanity was busy building its future and had no need for Council permission or guidance. He said they were willing to trade knowledge and peace but never obedience. The transmission ended, with a simple line. "We remember the exile and we thank you." That message spread across the galaxy faster than any ship. It became a legend among young races that dreamed of freedom. Some called the humans arrogant, but others saw them as proof that no law of power was eternal. The council debated whether to send a fleet to find them, but the risk was too great. Every race that had tried to follow human ships into the slipstream had vanished. Humanity had gone beyond reach, not in hiding, but in mastery. Years passed again, and the colonies grew into independent nations connected by friendship and shared history. The humans had built an alliance of their own without the council. Each world had its own culture and beauty, but all carried the same symbol, a star breaking through a ring of light. It was the mark of the Dawnbreakers, and it meant hope for all who saw it. Captain Lane, now an old man, watched from the bridge of his ship as new fleets departed every year. He knew his time was ending, but he also knew that humanity no longer needed him. They had become what he always hoped for, united, fearless, and free. Before his final mission, he met with Ava Ramirez and Dr. Brooks one last time. They spoke of how far they had come. From the days when the galaxy had turned its back on them, Brooks said that if anyone had told him then that they would build civilizations beyond the known universe, he would have laughed. Ramirez smiled and said that humans had always been stubborn, enough to do the impossible. Lane looked at them both and said softly, "We were exiled, but we found our way home, not to Earth, but to the stars." They stood together in silence, watching the endless sky, knowing that their journey had changed not only humanity, but the galaxy itself forever. Generations passed and humanity's name became something whispered across the stars. The Dawnbreakers had become legends, and their colonies had turned into great cities, spread over hundreds of worlds. The symbol of the breaking star was known, even in places where no human had ever walked. It stood for courage and freedom, and for the will to rise again, no matter the odds. On the worlds of Haven and others like it, the people lived in peace, building schools, cities, and ships that reached farther every year. They no longer saw themselves as exiles. They were the children of the stars, and they belonged to every corner of the universe. The Aurora spear still flew, though Captain Marcus Lane was long gone. His name was spoken in history, lessons, and songs. The ship was now commanded by Captain Nora Hayes, a quiet woman who had grown up hearing stories of the first Dawnbreakers. She believed in their dream and carried it forward under a new banner. Humanity was not just surviving, it was changing and growing into something greater. Under her leadership, the Aurora Spear became the center of a new exploration effort that aimed to reach the edges of known space and beyond. Lieutenant Ava Ramirez had retired many years before, but her students filled the new fleets with the same fire that once guided her hands. Dr. Ethan Brooks had passed away, but his work lived on in the scientists who came after him. They continued to develop new forms of slipstream travel that could bend time and distance even more than before. These engines made travel between galaxies faster and allowed communication across light years in seconds. The humans now spoke with their colonies on the other side of the universe as easily as neighbors, on the same street. With every new discovery, they shared what they learned freely with any race willing to listen. For many species, the humans had become mentors and allies. Their technology had changed whole worlds, bringing water to deserts and light to dark skies. Not everyone in the galaxy welcomed this new age. The Galactic Council still existed, but it was weaker than before. The old powers that once ruled through fear and law now found themselves small compared to the reach of humanity. Many council worlds relied on human trade and human-built machines. Their people lived longer, healthier lives thanks to medicine first made on Earth. The same council that had once voted to exile humanity now depended on its children for survival. It was a quiet irony that few dared to speak of aloud. Some members of the council began to whisper that perhaps exiling Earth had been their greatest mistake. Among the younger races, new movements began to rise. They looked to the humans as examples of what could be achieved through unity and hard work. On one small world named Syrah, a group of students built a ship using human designs and left to find the Dawnbreaker colonies. They said they wanted to learn from those who had turned exile into greatness. Their departure caused unrest in the council, but inspired many across the galaxy. Stories of humanity's kindness and strength spread faster than any fleet, and soon people from many species sought contact with them to trade, study, or simply see the worlds they had built. On Haven, Captain Nora Hayes received a visitor from one of these distant races. He was a tall being of silver skin and calm eyes who introduced himself as Arelon. He had come to ask for help for his people, whose world was dying. Hayes listened to his story and promised to send aid without asking for anything in return. Within months, human ships arrived in the skies of his home world. They built machines to heal the soil and purify the air. The people of Arelon watched in wonder as the land slowly came back to life. When he thanked Hayes, she only smiled and said, "Humanity remembers what it means to be cast aside. No one deserves to be left behind." This act of kindness echoed across the stars. The Mai story of how humans saved a dying world reached even the halls of the Galactic Council. For the first time in centuries, the Council sent an official invitation asking humanity to return not as outcasts but as partners. The message reached every Dawnbreaker colony and stirred debate among the leaders. Some said they should accept to prove that peace was possible. Others said that the Council's regret was too late and that humanity no longer needed its approval. Captain Hayes gathered the fleet captains to decide together. She told them that humanity had nothing to prove anymore. They had shown their worth, not through war, but through creation. After long discussion, they agreed that they would send one fleet back, not to bow before the Council, but to visit as equals. The Aurora Spear was chosen to lead the mission. The ship was prepared with care, its hull polished until it gleamed under the light of Haven's twin suns. When it lifted off, thousands watched in silence, knowing that history was being written again. Hayes stood on the bridge looking out at the stars and thought of those who came before: Lane Ramirez, Brooks Harper, and all the others who had built the path that led to this moment. She whispered a promise to them that humanity would never forget its beginning. The journey to the old galaxy took months, even with the fastest slipstream drives. When the fleet arrived near the border of the Council's space, hundreds of ships appeared to greet them. Some were armed, but none fired. The humans sent a simple message stating their purpose. They came in peace and with open hands. When they finally entered the orbit of the Council's capital world, the sight stunned everyone. Thousands of beings filled the skies, watching the human ships glitter like silver birds. Hayes stepped forward to address the assembly. She spoke calmly, saying that humanity forgave the Exile and thanked the Council for forcing them to grow stronger. She told them that the time of fear was over and that they wished to share what they had learned so that no species would ever face exile again. The hall was silent for a long time before the Council speaker, an old creature with crystal eyes, stood and said, "Humanity left as a danger and returns as a teacher. We see now that strength does not always destroy, sometimes it creates." The words spread like fire across the worlds of the Council, and many wept in relief. Hayes smiled and said simply, "We remember the exile, and we thank you." Then she turned and left the hall, followed by her officers. They had not come to reclaim anything. They had come to give hope. When the Aurora Spear returned to Haven, the people welcomed them as heroes. But Hayes knew that the real victory was not in the praise. It was in the quiet change that had begun across the galaxy. Other races began to work together, sharing ideas and helping one another. The humans had shown them a new way, one built on trust and courage. The Dawnbreakers had not only survived exile, they had transformed it into something beautiful. As the sun set over Haven, Hayes stood on the balcony of her ship and watched the stars. She thought of how far they had come and whispered that the story of Earth would never end because it now lived in every heart that dared to dream. The return of the Dawnbreakers changed the galaxy forever. The humans did not stay long in the old Council space, but the echo of their visit lingered for generations. The worlds that had once called them reckless now saw them as guides and builders. The stories of Captain Nora Hayes and the Aurora Spear spread to every corner of the known universe. People spoke of how the humans had come not to take revenge but to offer peace, and how they had reminded the old powers of what it meant to hope. Again, the galaxy slowly began to heal old divisions, and new friendships were born among worlds that had never trusted one another before. On Haven, the years passed quietly. The city grew larger and brighter, and the twin suns shone on towers of glass. And silver children learned in schools about Earth, the exile, and the long journey across the stars. They were told that humanity's strength was not in its machines but in its spirit. The people no longer feared the galaxy. They had become part of it. Their ships moved freely between the stars, carrying knowledge and help to any who asked for it. There were no longer borders to protect and no wars to fight. The dream that began on Earth had finally become real. Captain Nora Hayes grew older and spent more time watching the horizon from the bridge of the Aurora Spear. She had seen many worlds and met beings of every kind. She often thought of the first dawnbreakers and how far they had come. She sometimes spoke to the crew about the meaning of their journey, reminding them that they were more than travelers. They were the bridge between what the galaxy was and what it could become. The crew listened in silence because they knew her words were true. Humanity had taught the stars a new lesson, not through power but through persistence. In time, a new generation took control of the Dawnbreaker fleet. They were born among the stars and had never seen Earth yet. They carried its memory in their hearts. One of them was Captain Leo Carter, a young man who had studied under Hayes. He was curious and fearless and believed that the universe still held mysteries waiting to be found. He wanted to go beyond even the slipstream routes that humans had discovered. Hayes saw in him the same fire that once burned in Captain Marcus Lane, and she knew that he would lead the next great step. When she finally retired, she left the Aurora Spear in his care, telling him that the stars still had room for dreamers. Dr. Maya Brooks, a descendant of Ethan Brooks, continued his work at the Haven Research Institute. She had taken her ancestors' ideas and turned them into something new. Her team developed the first fold gates, giant rings of light that could link 2 points in space instantly. The first gate connected Haven to a distant colony and allowed families separated by light years to see each other in moments. It was a breakthrough that once again changed everything. The humans did not keep this gift for themselves. They shared it freely with every race that wanted to learn, and soon the galaxy became smaller and more connected than ever before. Trade ideas and art flowed across the stars, and the universe began to feel like one great home. The Galactic Council no longer ruled but served as a gathering place for all species to meet and share. The humans were not its leaders but its heart. Their representatives sat beside others, not above them, and every decision was made in unity. The voice of Captain Hayes was remembered in every meeting as the one who had said that strength without kindness was nothing. Her words became a guiding rule, and even the oldest and proudest races followed it. The galaxy entered an age of peace that no one had believed possible one day. Captain Leo Carter and Dr. Maya Brooks met on the bridge of the Aurora Spear. The ship was preparing for a new mission, unlike any before. They planned to travel beyond the edge of the mapped universe into a region of darkness where no signal had ever returned. Some said it was too dangerous, but Carter only smiled and said that danger had never stopped humans before. Brooks laughed and said that discovery was in their blood. The crew cheered as the engines came to life and the ship began to rise from the surface of Haven. People across the planet stopped to watch, knowing that another chapter of their story was beginning. As the Aurora Spear moved through the void, Carter looked out at the endless black and thought about Earth. He had seen the old recordings of its blue oceans and green lands. He felt proud knowing that everything he saw was born from that small world. The thought filled him with peace. He knew that even if Earth itself was far away, its spirit lived in every human who still looked to the stars. The ship crossed the borders of known space and entered the unknown. The lights of its engines shimmered against the dark, like a new sunrise. Back on Haven, news of the mission spread quickly. People gathered in squares to watch the live transmission from the Aurora Spear. Captain Hayes, though, retired, watched from her home near the city edge. She smiled when she saw Carter's face on the screen. He spoke calmly, saying that they would go as far as the stars would let them, and that they carried with them the hopes of all who believed in the future. His words echoed across the galaxy, reaching worlds both human and alien, and for a moment, the entire universe seemed to hold its breath. The journey lasted Many months the Aurora Spear and its crew crossed through strange clouds of energy and saw colors no eye had seen before. They recorded new stars and even found traces of life in places thought empty. The crew grew quiet as they realized they were seeing creation itself unfolding in front of them. Then one day they reached a vast field of light where space itself seemed to pulse with energy. Dr. Brooks said that it was the edge of the universe, or perhaps the beginning of another. They could go no farther, and yet they had already gone farther than anyone before. Carter stood at the viewport and whispered that they had found the end of Exile. He sent one final message to Haven, saying that wherever humanity went, the dream would follow and that no wall or border could ever hold them back again. Then the Aurora Spear turned and began the long journey home. Its engines glowed brighter than ever, as if carrying a piece of that light with them. The ship vanished into the slipstream, leaving behind trails of gold that shimmered for days. The people of Haven watched the sky and felt both pride and peace. They knew that their ancestors, who had once been exiled, would be proud of what they had become. Years later, children on Haven would learn about the voyage of Captain Carter and Dr. Brooks. They would read how the humans had gone to the edge of the universe and returned carrying the message that no species was ever truly alone. The Dawnbreakers had kept their promise, to move forward no matter what. The story of Earth had begun with exile but ended with unity and hope. As the suns rose over Haven, the people looked to the stars and knew that their journey would never truly end, because they were, and always would, be the children of the endless sky.